Dive in. So yeah, we're going to be talking about personas today, and I am going to try to keep this, as Jody mentioned, I'm going to try to keep this to about 30 minutes or so, because I really do want to make sure that we have time at the end to talk about, dive into this more. I'd love to hear questions, rebuttals, agreement, anything. I'd love to have some discussion at the end of this. So just a quick heads up there. And yeah, so Jody did a great job of introducing me, but I am Elyse. I live in DC. I'm a brand strategist. But before that, I graduated from William & Mary with a degree in English and explored various non-brand strategy career options. I was a copywriter for a bit because I really wanted to be Peggy Olson. Still really want to be Peggy Olson from Mad Men. Also worked at the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, which was about as fun and as delightfully morbid as you would expect. And I now work at Viget, which is not nearly as morbid and just as fun. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, Viget is a digital agency. We're based in Falls Church, but we have locations in Boulder, in Durham, in Chattanooga. And I get to work with a lot of awesome people, UX designers, product designers, developers, project managers, and of course, some really awesome branding folks. And I put a link in the chat, but we are looking for a branding apprentice this fall. So if you know of anyone, feel free to have them hit me up or apply through the Viget website. And so before I start, I feel like I should confess something. If you read the description for this event, then you know that I am not the world's foremost expert on personas, and I am also not always their biggest fan. I am recovering from being very anti-persona, which I'll get into in a bit. And in some ways, I still have a little bit of skepticism. And I don't think that I am alone in that. I think that there is a long-standing, time-honored debate in the UX product brand research realm about the importance and the efficacy of personas. And I am not here to say that I have all the answers or that I'm right. In fact, if anything, I am here to say I was wrong. Not wrong for being skeptical of personas, but wrong maybe in the way in which I was skeptical. So when I was first starting out, I saw personas like this, and admittedly, I think that this type of persona could work great depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But I found that sort of coming from a branding perspective, I ended up coming away with a lot more questions than answers when I was kind of using this type of persona. For other branding folks out there, our job is to form that emotional connection with a group of people and to understand what they love, what they don't love, and really why they are the way that they are. And when I look at stuff like this, I look at things like, okay, well, working Wanda, she lives on the beach in Charleston, South Carolina. That's interesting. And I want to know, why does she live on the beach? Did she always want to live on the beach? Are there things that she really doesn't like about living on the beach? How does that affect the way that she lives her life? I see that her husband is works long hours and he's a real estate lawyer. And so I'm so curious about the kinds of challenges that presents beyond the fact that she maybe doesn't always have time to cook really fancy, lengthy meals for her kids. And so I felt like when I looked at this, it felt like it wasn't giving me the information that I felt that I needed. And so like the mature young strategist that I was, I decided that personas were simply not worth my time and I just wasn't going to use them. I really thought that I could just sort of refuse to associate with personas, and I did for a long time. And it wasn't until I was kind of forced to use personas that I was also forced to ask the question that I should have been asking all along, which is, are personas really that bad? Or am I just bad at personas? And it was at this point that I reached the somewhat embarrassing conclusion that maybe I am the monster here. I think that, maybe personas are not good or bad. Maybe they simply are what we make of them. And that means that if we don't like them, rather than stomping away, we have the opportunity to make them better. So what I really want to talk about today is an approach to persona creation that our team used during the research phase for a rebrand. And what we discovered, often by accident, is that personas can actually be incredibly powerful tools for understanding your audience on a deep and fundamental level. But it does depend on how you go about it. So I will be using some examples from a project that I mentioned. And again, this project was a rebrand. And I think that it is important to note that this is happening in a branding context, because I do not want to suggest that this is the right approach for all personas, for all disciplines. I think that this is a helpful approach if you're trying to persuade your audience to adopt something. If you're really trying to kind of understand some of those core motivations and kind of why they are the way they are. But that's just a minor caveat. So some of kind of fellow nerds out there may be familiar with the Great Courses. They are a 20-year-old brand that creates long-form, college-level nonfiction content on everything from dog training to botany. And the team that I was on was responsible for renaming and rebranding their streaming platform, which was the Great Courses Plus. It is now called Wondrium, which is how I will refer to it. And right off the bat, when we started on this project and we were conducting audience research, we ran into the problem that I think probably a lot of you may have experienced, which is you know a lot about the target audience, but not what you actually need to know. So thanks to the efforts of our client team, we had access to an absolute ton of data on our audience. We had behavioral data, we had cluster analyses. We knew things like specifically what courses our audience liked to watch, what professors they liked, how much time they spent watching the courses, where they watched the courses. And in many ways, this was a huge luxury because it would have taken us, months or years to assemble this much data. The challenge was that the data could not tell us that one thing that we really needed to know about our audience, which is why. What were those underlying motivations that drove our audience's behavior? What were some of those needs and wants that were kind of lurking beneath the spreadsheets? We knew that if we wanted to be able to connect with our audience, we did need to know things like, what they were learning and what professors they liked. But we really needed to know why all of that, why was all that the case? And really what it comes down to it is, why do they love learning with Wondrium? And we knew that if we could figure that out, then we could kind of connect the truth of who Wondrium is as a brand and what they offer with the truth of what people were really seeking and what they really wanted. I mean, if we could do that, then of course we could make a really strong case for Wondrium. So then the question became, how do we get that information from this information, from what we had? How do you get information that tells you why people are doing what they do from information that is telling you, what they're doing? And this is rather tricky. And for us, step one was the realization that you can ask your audience and you can ask them why they love learning, but you can't expect them to know or to tell you. And I think that this is not a reflection at all on our audience's intelligence, because these were some of the most intelligent people that were more intelligent than me. And I do, though, think that it is very difficult for anyone to be insightful or introspective when they're filling out a form. I at least am not at my best when I'm filling out forms. And so I think that 30 seconds is just not a lot of time to be brilliant. And that's usually the only amount of time that people have to spend on it. So we did send out a survey to members of our target audience, and we did ask questions that were meant to kind of uncover why they loved learning. But we tried to be very careful about not taking anything that they said at face value. And that was okay. It's okay. It was totally fine that our audience couldn't tell us everything exactly what we needed to know, because what we did get, even from information that seemed less helpful, were clues. And this is where I use my obligatory Sherlock GIF. I think that what we had were a series of clues, and I think that by treating them as clues instead of facts, we were just able to go a lot deeper. I think that if you kind of jump to treating something as a fact, then it's very hard to question it. And questions really are sort of the lifeblood of what we do, and they are the way that you get to any sort of insight. So the first step, of course, was trying to gather those clues. The next step was to organize the clues. So after we'd gotten all of this raw data, I was personally just kind of gung-ho, ready to follow the clues and start digging in. But what we wanted to do first was just figure out what we had and try to do some organizing. So what you see here is a spreadsheet of survey responses from our audience. And this is only a tiny section of what we had. And our team spent hours coding this. We combed through every single spreadsheet, every survey response, trying to look for patterns in the way that people were describing their learning experiences and the things that drove them. And in the end, we were able to extract this list of commonly used words, expressions that people used to describe why they loved learning. So this is pretty much kind of lifted using their language. And so you can see stuff like people talked a lot about how education is life-changing. They talked a lot about wanting to be part of discourse. And then some people, said, well, I have all these chores and I need something to occupy my time. So this kind of huge list of stuff, and clearly not a lot that we can do with this. And so we tried to then group and kind of organize those responses into categories, which is kind of represented by each of these columns. We're using a whimsical board here. And so if you look over to the left here, you can see that we'd kind of grouped all these responses that had to do with people wanting an alternative to commercial TV, to media, people who wanted to maybe escape the kind of political news cycle. And then we had people who actually wanted to be able to engage in that political news cycle in a more informed way. So really just grouping like responses together and just organizing. And honestly, at this point, I was chafing a little bit because organization is not my strong suit. If anyone here is at Viget, they can attest to that. I really get very eager about digging in and talking about the stuff and, asking all the questions. And I do think that had the UX designer on our team not encouraged us to spend this time organizing and laying this foundation, we would not have gotten as far as we did. Because I think that this gave us this very tidy kind of workspace where we could think, where we could see exactly kind of what we were working with. And that is what enabled us to move on to the kind of step 3, which was to then follow those clues. And what this looked like really was just, we looked back at these columns, we kind of took a step back and we started to think about, what are we trying to see here? What are these columns trying to tell us? Why would someone want an alternative to commercial TV and media? And what might they actually have in common with someone who wants to be more involved with commercial media and current events? Can we find a single motivation that kind of ties all these people together, and that is sort of the root motivation at the heart of this little kind of grouping here? This was not really a process of asking super smart, intelligent questions at all. This was really the process of just asking questions and being willing to follow those questions to uncomfortable places. And I think that had we not had this amazing team of people who were willing to ask those questions and debate and disagree and just kind of talk, we wouldn't have gotten this far. So I think that is a huge thing during this process, is to have little kind of question partners. Just highly recommend, because really ultimately then we were able to boil down each column into this kind of root motivation. And so what you can see in this yellow card is a little janky. Again, we're just kind of trying to use whimsical for this. We kind of had been able to peel back this onion, and if you look at that left-hand column again, it felt like those cards boiled down to this desire to just be better. That people felt that by watching One Dream content, they could feel like they were, one, being better than just watching Netflix all day. They were better than getting embroiled in political debates. And I think that if they were being honest, and many of them were, they wanted to feel better and smarter than maybe some of the other people in the room, which I think is completely natural. So as you can see, now we're really starting to get somewhere. Now we're starting to get to some real underlying motivations here. And so our next step then was to take these little yellow cards and distill them one more time into this kind of final core set of motivations. And also to discard some of the motivations that we felt like maybe not as strong. That little middle column there that only has like 3 cards, we felt like, does that deserve a place? Maybe not. Let's kind of discard that in favor of some of these stronger ones. So in the end, we had this final core set of motivations, and it really did encompass everything, all of those hundreds and hundreds of responses that we had heard from our audience. And I think gave us this really nice, concise set of core motivations to work with. And, very tempting to at that point say, cool, mission accomplished, we can move on, we can use those motivations to inform the way that we reach our audience, to the kind of messaging that we create for them. Why even bring in personas at all? Why, when we can just, we kind of translated this to a nice little list, why, when we could just show the client this and say, this is what is driving your audience, keep this in mind when you're trying to communicate them, and we will keep that in mind when we are building out the brand strategy, the story for Wondrium. So, why bring in personas at all? And I think that the problem is that we were still struggling with one thing at the end of this, which is, the question is always, will the client be able to use the list? And I think that this is one of the biggest pitfalls that we agency folk can encounter, or at least it's one that I can encounter. It's, I do all this work and maybe it's smart, and maybe I present the graphs and the charts and the core insights in the presentation, and the client is super impressed in the meeting and absolutely loves it, and then never uses it. It gathers dust in some file on their computer, and it's not because it's not right. It's not because the work isn't good. It's just because, the client has a million things on their plate, and it's really hard to remember to do this one thing, to add another layer of thinking to what you're already doing. So I think the realization that we kind of reached was that smart and impressive work does not always equal useful or usable work. And we really had to find a way to turn this list into something that our client would want to adopt, would want to incorporate into their thinking. And so the question is, how do you do that? And we kind of cheated here, and we just decided to see, well, what are they already doing? How are they thinking about their audience, and how can we build on this? So instead of asking them to learn a completely new way of looking at their audience, can we just kind of build on the framework that they're using and maybe teach them how to use the framework a little bit better? So that's what we did. We looked at kind of, how does Wondrium think about their audience? And they were already using personas. They had this seeker persona and a solver persona. And they described seekers as folks who loved learning for the sake of learning. They just wanted to learn as much as they could. They loved it just because it made them happy. Solvers were a little bit more pragmatic. They usually had a task in mind or a goal in mind when they were learning. And so, for example, a seeker might take a course on ancient Egypt because they were just really excited by mummies and wanted to learn more. And, a solver might take the same history course because their kid was maybe, studying history in school and they wanted to be able to help them with their homework. So, two very different people. And according to our research, this was actually an accurate way to group their audience at a high level. And it was very clear that the client team really had adopted this way of thinking, and it felt very natural to them. It is something that had really stuck. And so rather than telling them, no, throw all that away, we're going to, make you do this completely different version, I wanted to see if we could just use seekers and solvers and kind of build on that. But we also knew that one of the challenges to these personas was that, obviously that group encompasses a wide variety of people with a wide variety of motivations. And what was difficult was that they lacked specificity, which was a challenge when it came down to, creating messages for different folks. And so we felt like there was an opportunity to make these more specific. And so what we ended up doing was deciding to treat seekers and solvers not as individual personas, but actually as families of personas. But as we know, family is a little bit complicated. And our big question was sort of like, well, how do we create personas for each family? Who goes in what family? Who belongs where? And that is what led us to our fourth step, which is to build the personas out of the why. So we wanted to create personas for the seeker family and for the solver family that were really based on those motivations that we had already uncovered. We wanted those motivations to be the building blocks of our personas, which meant that in the end, those personas would be defined by what they were driven by, rather than maybe what their occupation was or how much money they made. And so I think that the easiest thing to do at this point, and definitely the option that I considered at this point, was to assign a persona to each motivation. And so, if you had the drawn to learning motivation, then you would have a persona who embodied that. And maybe we would call him Dave, drawn to learning, or, Ella, engage with ideas. The problem, though, when we started to think about this was that people are just way too complicated for that. We humans are weird. We have multiple reasons for doing things, reasons that we don't always know. And so that means that Dave, drawn to learning, is really more like Dave, drawn to learning, who also wants to use his time wisely and explore new things while he's at it. He is, he's supposed to be like all of us, and we do have this web of reasons, and that's really what makes us interesting, and that is what makes us human. And so that we knew at this point that, okay, if we want to create these person-y personas, we're going to have to really lean into the mess. And that is exactly what we did with this rather crazy whimsical board, which I'm going to break down here. You can see there was a lot of mess. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of questions. But really what we ended up doing was we brought in our trusty set of core motivations. We gave them each a card. And then we just started to hypothesize about different groupings of motivations. So we thought, okay, well, what if we have someone who is motivated by all of the things except for the pragmatic reasons? So they're motivated by all the more kind of idealistic reasons, like, connecting with the world and being kind of inexplicably drawn to learning, but they don't really care about using their time wisely. They don't care as much about keeping their mind active. So we basically just have this very idealistic learner who just gets endlessly excited and inspired by learning, and who could not conceive of it being a practical thing. We at that point kind of looked back at our data, looked back at our spreadsheets, and looked for evidence that this person existed, quotes, anything. And we found one quote that was just awesome. And it's someone who described themselves and their kind of little group of people as those who seek a genuine fountainhead of knowledge. Which was just a lovely thought. And we really had no choice but to then call this persona the quester. And we grouped them in with the seeker family because, clearly this type of person is not in it for problem solving reasons. So we had this one persona, and then we just did that process again and again and again, looking at different motivations or different combinations of motivations, just kind of stepping back and kind of stroking our beards and wondering about the person who emerged. And then we would sort of vet them against the research, and does this person exist? And in the end, we ended up with the seeker family, which was comprised of the collector, the quester, and the snacker. And then we had the solvers, which were our supplementarians, late bloomers, and our artisans. So all this was great. We have our seeker family built out. We have 3 nice personas. We have our solver family built out, another 3 personas. Great. The problem is that the diagrams were making us look a little bit like this kind of famous GIF. There was just no way that we could ever present this to our client and have it be helpful. Going back and looking at this, I can barely decode it now. I also apologize for the sirens that you're about to hear. This is a hallmark of Falls Church and being on West Broad Street. So we needed to find a way to make this memorable, something that our client would really want to think about. We really just needed to make each person feel real. And so what we did, we gave them an illustration courtesy of our art director, Elliot. and that helped. And what we also did was we presented these to our client with kind of a high level overview of each persona, sort of a cheat sheet. This is the quester, you know, they want to continue their journey towards knowledge and wisdom. We pulled in some quotes that we'd gotten from their actual audience that that kind of reinforced this persona and made them feel more real. But then I think the heart of this work was really when we got down to writing the kind of the story of the persona, and focusing on unpacking the core motivations that really drive them. So for the quester, you know, we said that the joy of learning is less about the moment of discovery, and it's more about the journey of discovery. Knowledge or wisdom, enlightenment, understanding is the destination, the prize to be won. Will questers ever reach their destination? Possibly not. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't still go. In the end, questing isn't about achieving a goal. It's about believing that the thing you seek is worth the seeking. It's about having adventures, encountering new ideas, and becoming a better person by pursuing something good. So we wanted this to really, again, unpack those motivations and feel like a story and feel like a person that they knew or that they maybe felt like was them. And then the last thing that we did was we broke down kind of our communication opportunities and challenges. So when it comes to talking to this person, what are the challenges that we're going to meet? So, you know, for opportunities, we knew that questers are going to be these really highly motivated people. We're not going to have to convince them that learning is great. They are there. But the challenge is that they do have this sort of purist attitude when it comes to the content. And, you know, Wondrium was looking at adding a new kind of branch of content, more kind of lifestyle type content, which is fantastic. But we knew that the quester might look at that a little bit askance. So, you know, how do we kind of help them along with that? So the last thing I want to do is just sort of, I want to compare the quester to a solver persona and just sort of kind of highlight the differences between these kind of groupings of personas, and how each persona really did give us this chance to make these highly kind of unique little individuals. And so this is the supplementalist, who is part of the solver family, again, more pragmatic. And what we talked about with the supplementalist was that this is someone who wants to augment their understanding of a subject. So we had folks talking about how they were teachers, and they wanted to expose their students to more than they maybe had access to. We heard from master's and PhD folks who just wanted to kind of combine what they were already learning. And but then when we looked at what was actually driving them, we saw that, you know, supplementalists, they know that the best thing isn't always about being the smartest or the fastest. It's about being the most prepared. And so supplementalists believe that there is no such thing as too much information, and that having the right information comes from having all of the information. So supplementalists are looking for a way to go deeper and farther than the material they might have readily available. They want to be sure they left no answer undiscovered and no piece of information uninvestigated. So again, very different from our kind of idealistic, quixotic quester person, but no less interesting, and I think no less compelling. You felt like this was still a real person and wanted to talk to that person, wanted to reach that person. So these were kind of our 6 personas in the end. So again, the seekers, the collectors, the questers, the snackers, and then we had our supplementalists and our artisans and our late bloomers. And this was them and kind of all of their complicated, messy, wonderful glory. I think that our kind of takeaway from this is that, you know, as tempting as it was in many times to try to corral the mess and to try to just kind of get it into a nice, neat package and a nice, neat box, that's not really what I think personas are best at. I think that personas are a great way to adapt your boxes to your humans and really give you the freedom to explore the people that you're trying to talk to. So in conclusion, to kind of wrap this up, if we go back to this question of are personas any good, I think that yes, the question that maybe we could all ask is, you know, can we make them any good? And my answer certainly is yes, but I think only if we are willing to wade into the unknown and really deal with the mess and also the wonderfulness of dealing with humans. I think, speaking personally, it was very easy for me to blame the tool, to blame personas, instead of maybe my own sort of failing when it came to using that tool. But I also think that that's just a challenge that we all face. You know, we who are in design and communication, I think there's this idea that the way that we use our tools and our methods, that is a reflection of what we value, which comes with a huge amount of opportunity and excitement. But I think that if I had a modest proposal for this talk, I think it is that, if we use personas based on what we value, and if we use them to engage with our audience on a really thoughtful way and to explore what makes them human and explore their person-ness, then I think that we will be able to create the type of personas that I think we will all be excited about using, but especially maybe those younger, up and coming, slightly rash and immature brand strategists. I think that we'll all be excited about using. And last thing, I would be remiss if I did not mention the team of folks who I worked on this with. None of this would have happened without them. It feels weird to give this presentation without them because they were all such amazing partners. And again, the talking, the debating, the questioning, it happens best with other people. So if you take away nothing else, I would say do personas with other persons, and I think that they will be much better. That is all I have. Yeah, Jody, I don't know if I should pass it to you, but I would love to hear thoughts and questions.
Well, thank you. This is a fantastic walkthrough. I love seeing the titles that you all chose for the personas and the accompanying illustrations. Alex, do we have any questions that have been starting to come in?
Yep, we do have one, and certainly do use the chat channel to ask some questions. We have a question from Viget. Very interesting. Thank you, Elyse. Can you share how this research was utilized by the client?
Yes, absolutely. The first thing was that it was actually utilized by us moving forward, and that was partly a selfish thing for us to create personas like this, because we then moved into creating a brand strategy, thinking through how we wanted to position Wondrium moving forward, and being able to define and to understand what was really driving our audience really informed how we then positioned Wondrium and the story that we told, and the way that we kind of broke down that story to talk to different audiences and be more specific. But I think that for the Wondrium team, one thing that we'd really heard when we talked to their marketing group was just this desire to have more targeted messaging for people. So they had the ability to kind of craft unique messages for different audiences that they wanted to reach. To filter the way that they talked about courses in kind of the way that a certain group would respond to. They were really craving that specificity. They didn't want to just be able to say, well, how would we position a course on ancient Greece to a solver? Well, that could open so many possibilities. And so I think that they wanted that specificity so that they could create those kind of unique targeted messages. But yeah, I don't know, hopefully that answered that question.
That's great. Thank you, Elyse. A couple of other questions. So this is from Carl. What was the tool set you used, and does some of the research have to be done remote?
So yeah, good question. This was right before the pandemic, so we kind of squeezed it in. We used, so you saw we used Whimsical for kind of organizing stuff. We used Airtable for processing, and found that was just a fantastic way to tag and filter. And Catherine, our UX designer, is kind of an Airtable whiz, and she was able to make Airtable do things I didn't think was really possible. I learned a lot. But I think that Airtable was a great way to process and analyze research. We also used, we did send out some surveys. And so I can't remember what survey tool that we used. I think I'm covering that, but yeah, I don't know if anything else comes to me, I'll definitely mention that. A lot of it was just messiness and like putting stuff on the whiteboard and then scrapping it. So we were a little scrappy, but
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Another question from Andrew. How long did this process take from meeting client to sharing them?
Great question. I looked back at the timeline recently, and I see that some actually teammates are on the call. So correct me, Allie, if I'm wrong, but I believe this was We started in December. I think we shared this with them in mid-January, early February. I think it was about 4 to 6 weeks, but I could be wrong about that. But yeah, I think that was about it.
That's great. Thanks, Elyse. Another question from Evan. What about new users? Question mark. How do you determine which persona they fall under? And I'm assuming this is more from a product user.
Yes, no, that's a great question. So one thing, we were able to set up an Intercept survey on their current website, and we were able to kind of target folks who we felt like maybe weren't signing up for Wondrium quite yet, but were interested. So that was one thing that we did. But I think that moving forward, one thing that we really wanted to do was help Wondrium see that this tool, Personas, that they should be thinking about all the research they would continue to do as they kind of brought in this new audience, that they should be filtering it through that lens. And so we were kind of careful to say these personas that we're showing you today are not the set in stone personas. If you find that they wanted to target a slightly younger audience. So, if you find that you're getting folks who don't fit into this persona group, then let's think critically about that. Let's see if if we can create a persona for them. But I think that when we talked to them and when we looked at that sampling of new audience members that we found, it was still pretty easy to see those kind of core motivations map back. And I think that that's the great thing about going really, really deep. You get to some very weird human places. And I think that it's much easier then to kind of bring in new folks, because age and, other demographic info, I think is less of a meaningful difference. And deep down, those people are still kind of in many ways the same. But yeah, it was a great question. I think that it's something that I hope they continue to use and evolve in future.
Very cool. Got a shout out for +1 from Lindsay on using Airtable for coding and processing. Such a great tool.
It's amazing. Yeah.
We got a question from Emeric. Thank you for your presentation. Very insightful. What are your views on user stories? Should they be derived from good personas?
That's a good question. Can you expand a little bit on kind of the context and what you're specifically talking about with user stories? I don't know if it's a...
Sure. Yeah. So basically, as an example, software design, right? We have different roles, different types of users. You want to make sure that you want to kind of write some user stories so that everybody can understand the process better. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I do think that in our heads, those should be derived from good personas, because I think that, it should still, to me at least, I feel like it should still kind of come back to, what does this person need? And why do they need that? And so I think, yeah, grounding those stories in insights, I think that's important, but I would love to be corrected if that's not what other people think.
That's cool. Got a follow-up question from Vipa. Did the Intercept survey allow the marketing team to direct new users to only specific topics of learning?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to, actually. I don't think so, but I think that would be really interesting. So yeah.
Cool. Got a question from Pamela. Did your research help rebrand their name, or did you research to help rebrand their name?
Indirectly, I would say. We did continue to research, and we tested the names actually with our target audience. And ultimately we didn't make a decision like, oh, seekers will really like this name versus solvers. But I think that interestingly, if you think about the name Wondrium, it has much more of a seeker vibe and a little bit less of a, problem solving thing. And that was because as we continued to get to know the great courses, and as we continued to delve into their audience, it felt like the greatest opportunity was sort of lying with those folks who did have more of a seeker bent. So the short answer is not directly, but I think that it was sort of present in the way that we were thinking about it.
That's cool. Question from Natalie. How did you motivate users to fill out the surveys for research? Did you use other methods other than surveys for research?
We did not, not that I know of. I think one thing we tried to keep the surveys really, really short, because I think that, that's just a basic thing, but tried to keep them short. The one thing that was fantastic about OneDream's audience is that they had a lot of feelings about everything. They didn't really need to be persuaded to share their thoughts, and that was something that was actually kind of a distinctive thing about them, and that the Great Courses team, the OneDream team, they just get a constant flood of input and feedback, and we kind of identified early on that, okay, the way that it was going was overwhelming them, honestly. And it can be so paralyzing, I think, to get that amount of feedback on every single thing that you're doing. And so one thing that we wanted to do was kind of help them maybe pivot their mindset a little bit to, how do you harness the power of highly motivated users, and how do you use that to your advantage, rather than being kind of the constant on the receiving end. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Elyse, I have a question. Did you create any anti-personas in addition to the personas that you shared?
Ooh, I would have to go back to the drawing board. There were personas that I think we may have cut. Honestly, they evolved a lot as we worked through them. The process was very much about, I would do all this research, talk with the team, go out, write them up, and then literally come back, put them on a wall and show them to the team and say, does this feel right? And we talk about them. We'd mark all over them, and I'd go back and make edits. And it was really a very collaborative process. And so I remember things like the supplementalist and the late bloomer evolved a ton, because we really wanted to make sure that we were making them as compelling and as sort of true as the kind of seekers. And so none that really ended up on the cutting floor, but definitely a lot of evolution. Yeah.
Great. We got a question from Vipul. Did you use persona for content creation or content strategy? Sometimes personas can be useful for raw material for content, ?
That is a fantastic question. We unfortunately were not able to do content creation or content strategy for them. But when we showed the personas to the team that was in charge of development for the content, they were actually really excited. And they said that they could absolutely see leveraging those kind of insights when they thought about the courses. And they were sitting there like, oh, this course would be great for this person. This course would be great for this person. And so I think that they saw the usefulness there, but sadly, we were not able to get into content strategy. But I think that it absolutely should be used and could be used. I don't quite know what that would have looked like if we had been thinking about, the content.
These are fantastic questions, people. Keep them coming. So yeah.
Yeah, would love to hear if anyone has. I'm sure folks here are experts on personas and have other tips, tricks. Would love to hear that. Yeah, these are great questions.
Elyse, do you know if sometimes personas are sort of posted up in offices to help remind folks of their users at every moment that they turn around? I know we've all been sort of remote probably since y'all created these, but do you know if there were any artifacts that the company sort of produced to help grow the knowledge of all of personas throughout the company?
That is a great question. So we actually sort of helped them along with that a little bit. And what we actually did was the deliverable that we created when we handed them those we actually created physical books that housed everything that we had kind of compiled in our research, but we had a space dedicated to personas. And we felt like having this physical thing that they could hold, that they could flip through. Each book was tailored to the department and to the person. We felt like by doing that, at least help kind of avoid that situation where it gets put on a file on their computer. And that seemed to resonate with them. I don't know if they kept them. I don't know where they are now, but I think that there was sort of this look of like, oh, books, yes, we love books. We can use this, and we selfishly had a lot of fun making the books. So that was partly just a fun thing that we did.
Very cool. We got a few more questions coming through. This is great. We have one from Anne. Your presentation was very comprehensive and helpful. Can you recommend any resources for building up my skills? I'm assuming around the research and persona side.
Yeah, that is a great question. Oh boy, I'm trying to think back to any materials that we referenced during this project. And I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but I would love to think about creating like a little list or something. Again, it felt a little bit like this was venturing into unknown territory for me and for kind of folks on our team. And so that was terrifying. But if I can think of any resources, which I'm sure there are ones out there, I will, maybe I can send those to Jody or something that can accompany the recording.
That's cool. Thank you, Elyse. Now we have a question from Kai. Thank you for the presentation. Very insightful. Is Viget using this process as a sort of a template for how you will continue to dive into future rebranding projects and creating personas? Or will the process change or evolve based on the business you are working with?
Yeah, I think that the short answer is yes, we do want to use this in future. I do think that there is, we try to be careful about templatizing things too much, because I think that it can be very easy to start relying on the same process, the same template. And, really this process worked really well for Wondrium, and I could see it working on other projects. So I think that we will continue to use this, but I would also like to explore, what happens if we don't have a client that has absolute mountains of research. What happens if we start to do some of that research on our own and we can't really rely on that. So I could see it, and I'm excited about the opportunity to maybe kind of change it, flex it, as we continue to use it. But yes, I think we'll absolutely continue using it.
That's great. Were there any this is a question from Andrew. Were there stakeholders or person who insisted that you add something specific to the personas?
Oh, good question. Surprisingly, no. And I have been in many presentations where people want, stuff added and everything, but no, actually, it was actually really cool. The way that we knew that the personas were kind of hitting home and resonating were that they all started identifying which persona they were. And so we were sitting around with this like group of 15, 20 people, and they were like, "Ooh, I think I'm sort of a snacker, but also maybe a late bloomer, and I think I'm actually a quester." And we had already self-identified in our group, so we took some time to kind of nerd out about that. But no, I think they really felt like this covered everything, and they were, I think, a little bit shocked to find that there was a way to boil down everything that they knew about their audience into some, 6 really clear personas. But I honestly was a little bit surprised by that. I was expecting feedback. Oh, looks like there's a question from.
Yep.
Okay, Jody.
I was just going to say, I think we got another question. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Right, one more question from Margie. Was there any way that the client could measure results? More subscriptions or more engagement? Were there specific metrics or KPIs you guys are measuring this?
Yes, we talked about that a good bit in the branding process as a whole. I don't have any insight into whether or not they tried to measure results based on the actual personas and whether they were able to get that granular. I think that absolutely they should. But I think that one thing that they very wisely kind of noted was that when you're going through a huge rebrand like this, especially with an audience that has been used to the same brand for 20 years, that for a little while things are going to be wonky, and you have to help people through that process of adjusting, and that jumping too quickly to measuring like how are people feeling about this, is this working, that can often kind of spook you a little bit and get you off track. So they were taking the kind of long game approach to this, but I think that we definitely encourage them to, you know, measure this, and there's room to evolve these as always. But sadly, I don't know if they are doing that right now.
Maybe we have time for like one last question before we wrap up, if anybody's got anything. All right, Andrew, you are lucky winner of the last question.
That's one.
So Andrew asks, what do you wish you knew then versus what you know now?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. Let me think about that for a second, because there's a lot. You know, I think that I remember one turning point. It took me a really long time to stop analyzing everything. There was one point where I'd like printed out this gigantic spreadsheet and I had it on the floor and it covered half of the room, and I was literally crawling around highlighting stuff. And I really just felt like if I just kept going and kept on like finding more information, processing, that it would just somehow magically lead me somewhere. And I remember creative director Ali was like, okay, at some point you do need to start to make some hypotheses here, and you do need to start to work with this and see, you know, you can make mistakes. You can make mistakes and move on and refine, but you're not going to get anywhere if you just continue to soak in the data. And so I think that that's a huge thing, that, you know, with personas, it is a messy process, and it is okay to make stops and starts, to go down one path and realize that it's wrong and to go back again. I think that, again, the key was sort of tenacity and curiosity, to never be daunted by, oh, I got it wrong. No, just turn around, go back, try something else. And I think that that can't be done when you are just kind of sitting in front of your computer hoping that the spreadsheet will speak to you, because it never does. So I think that that is one thing that I learned. And yes, these are llamas on my shirt. Thank you for noticing.
That's fantastic. I had not realized you had llamas on your shirt. I love it.
My version of a power suit is just my llama shirt.
That's amazing. And yes, spreadsheets never speak back to you, do they?
I wish. It would make my job so much easier.
I know. Well, Elyse, thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. This has been fantastic. And thank you to everyone who joined in this evening. I think we had about 60 folks here this evening. Welcome again to anybody. It's your first time coming. So glad that you can join us. And please join us for our August event as well. We have Dr. Jaya Srivastava, who is a design strategist at CNN. Going to be talking about design thinking and flaring and focusing and all of that in between messiness that sometimes happens for us as designers. So please be sure to join us for that. But again, thank you, Elyse. So glad that you could join us this evening. Appreciate it.